Youngpreneurs Podcast, episode number 168 with your host, Victor Ahipenny. What's up, world? Another day, another podcast. And today, with investing being on the tips of the tongue of a lot of people, with the cryptocurrency being the talk around the pub table and the dining room table and the water cooler and anywhere else you can. We haven't got anyone in the cryptocurrency space, but what I have got is somebody even better who knows and understands the sound economic and financial matters like nobody else. His name's Courtney Reum, and he began as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, and he worked for some huge brands like Procter Gamble, Armour and Vitamin Water. And after a successful career there, him and his brother have gone on to take their own company to a whole new level. And so we talk about how he managed to transition out of that, how he got his vision really clear, how he fits in investing in multiple different industries and multiple different companies, and how that all really works and how the expansion's gone so quickly. And it's just really interesting. He's been featured in Forbes 30 under 30, and their company has been featured in the 500 fastest growing private companies in America. And it was a complete honor and really interesting to look at how you can look into investment, into growth, and into so many different aspects of business. So I'm sure you will absolutely love that, and you'll get to hear about his book. So if you're into startups, you're going to learn how you can shortcut your startup, the unconventional book, into diving into the trenches. And we'll have a link to that, plus everything else we talk about at passiveincomeyoung.com. And make sure wherever you listen to your podcast, you leave us a rating and a review, as I love hearing back from our listeners. So in the meantime, guys, I hope 2018 is going superbly well for you. And as always, keep living life on your own terms. You're listening to the Youngpreneurs Podcast, the number one resource online for under 35-year-olds, where we chat twice a week to the most inspiring entrepreneurs in the world. We have it all. If you're looking for inspiration, guidance, or actionable tips to help you transition from that job into a business, or if you're ready to take that business to a whole new level, then this is the place to be. Get ready to live life on your own terms. Youngpreneurs, welcome to another episode of the Youngpreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Victor Ahipenny, and today I want to thank you for joining us, because you could be anywhere in the world and you chose to be with us. I've got my awesome, and when I mean us, I mean our awesome guest today, Courtney Reum, who is the co-founder of M13, at which we're going to find out a hell of a lot more about. And I'm sure for those of you in the investment world, you're going to be fairly interested on how you can maybe transition out of that world. So welcome to the show, Courtney.
Thanks so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
So I love to get a bit of a background and an insight into kind of our guests and how they actually got into the entrepreneurship side of things. Like, was it something that you'd always chased since you're a kid, or was it something you stumbled upon, or how did that happen?
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit of a couple things. My parents were not entrepreneurs, but I think in an indirect way, by them being very secure. And, my dad was that guy that worked for 3 companies over nearly 50 years, and you just don't see that kind of loyalty anymore. But I think in a way, because they did those sort of things, it made me less risk adverse. So I think that was kind of the start of the planting of the seeds. And then truthfully, as I'm sure we'll get into, my path to this was to being an entrepreneur was through investment banking. And while I was at Goldman Sachs, I worked on consumer products brands. So for people that are familiar with Vitamin Water, which is now owned by Coca-Cola, or Under Armour, which is a global sports brand, I think I got exposed to some of those people in my early and mid-20s. And when you see a guy like Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour, do it, you think, well, I don't know if I can, but we're going to give it a shot. And that was kind of one of my many influences.
Sweet. That's pretty awesome to, I guess not even to work on them at that stage, but also to see where they are in the future, like to give you that kind of like, well, they're doing well, and then holy shit, this is where they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first time I sat in an Under Armour boardroom, I think Kevin Plank was 32 and I was 24, and he doesn't seem that much different than you. And he certainly had a great idea and lots of grit and hustle, but I think it inspires you to feel like it's at arm's length and doable.
Yeah, and that's what we like. Ironically, that's what we want to do on this show is really highlight to people out there listening. Like, you can do this too. You can get out there. All these people that we talk to are just everyday people like you and I. And so, from investment banking, I mean, what did you study to prior to getting into investment banking? Yeah, because I know a lot of investment banking. Some do, you know, study business. Some do engineering. Some do, all these different things. um, what did it go into, and then how did you transition out of that working 9 to 5?
Yeah, I think I was not one of those kids that knew exactly what I wanted to do at age 14 or whatnot. And so I guess, tried to just work hard, do good things, hope that that continued to lead to options and doors opening. So I went to Columbia University in New York for undergrad and then Harvard for business school. But at a place like Columbia, they're very much into broad-based liberal arts. I think I'm the opposite of a technical founder. So compared to a lot of people starting on Wall Street with me, I certainly didn't have the financial modeling, and I wasn't an engineer, so I was much more, I guess, tried to be more well-rounded, and then learned the actual craft of finance. But certainly, I'm in my late 30s. There was nothing equivalent to an entrepreneurship class at in undergrad at Columbia, and it was almost like just starting it at Harvard when I was there.
Yep. And where did you hit a point that you're like, I can't handle this anymore, or did you hit a point that you're like, I want to try and be doing my own thing? Like, what was the tipping point for jumping out?
Yeah, I mean, again, it was we did these little like kind of joking awards, not awards. What do you call it? Kind of like here in the U.S. we call them senior superlatives. Like when you graduate in high school and they say most likely to succeed, most likely to be in the Olympics. We did a secret ballot before when we were in training at Goldman Sachs, and I was voted most likely to quit after 2 weeks. My nickname was Surfer Boy at Goldman, which for someone like you from Brisbane, that's probably a good nickname. For someone working at Goldman Sachs, not exactly. So the way I view it is I outperformed by lasting 4 or 5 years in investment banking, and so for me it was always like it's going to be a great stepping stone to something else. It was never going to be a career for me. So I lasted much longer than I ever thought I would, and this will be hard for a lot of people to believe who are listening, but I only left investment banking, call it a little over 10 years ago, I guess 11 years ago. I was the only friend of mine that didn't leave a Wall Street firm to go work at a hedge fund or a private equity group. And it's hard to believe. I mean, a lot of them are doing it now, but only 10 years ago, order of magnitude, nobody was doing it. Now it's obviously pretty commonplace, so it can change pretty quickly.
Yeah. And so tell us more a bit about like M13 and how that came about and what you guys do now.
Sure. Well, it kind of starts with our first venture that we started when we left Goldman Sachs, which, against all odds, was the first organic and sustainable alcohol brand called Vive Spirits. So we started that, sold it a couple years ago to a big multinational conglomerate. And in the context of doing it, I can assure you there's no business that's more, I guess, kind of like painful in the trenches execution than spirits. At least I can only speak to the U.S. because it's so regulated. It's such a monopoly among 4 or 5 people. But the good side of that was that it made us really grateful for other industries we got exposure to, and just being in that world, I guess we found ourselves in a lot of interesting rooms. So when we went to sell it, which was about 2 years ago, in the probably couple years prior to that, so going back 4 or 5 years, we had been asked to join some boards. We were advisors here and there. We had done some angel investing. And so when we sold Vive, we then turned around and branded our holdco M13, which had about 40 investments in it. Today it's over 100. But it's really about, I guess, kind of using the pattern recognition of being invested in 100 companies, mostly across tech and consumer tech brands, a lot of direct-to-consumer brands, and going, there's just got to be a better way to build the mousetrap for a lot of these brands, because we had the benefit of seeing all the chatter or fielding their questions and going, gosh, there's a lot of uniqueness to every company, but there's also a lot of overlap that's not being captured. So our whole goal with M13 is to kind of, we call it, have a playbook approach to institutionalizing certain repeatable behaviors, because there's lots of examples of things that I get asked every day by different companies where they just ask things like, hey, do you have a contact to get into Target, which is a big retailer in the US? Or, hey, do you know a good digital marketing agency? So if we could kind of act as a central repository for some of this stuff and put it together in a way that's scalable and repeatable, what we're trying to do with M13 is, rather than me start another company, be the CEO of it, can I either start or join other companies and almost have a platform approach where we're trying to help a bunch of companies at once and affect change at maybe a higher level. So that's what our goal is with M13.
And how's the goal going? Like, is it?
Yeah, it's so far so good. I mean, we've always a lot of work to do, but we've kind of taken our first couple brands on that we work closely with. We've done, like I said, a lot of consumer tech stuff, a lot of direct to consumer, but we've got an organic, for those people that know what Slim Jim is, kind of like an organic beef jerky stick called Chomps that in the past year has become the number one selling item in Trader Joe's here in the U.S. We have a superfood smoothie company that's gone from zero to almost 40 million in sales in just over 2 years, and a couple other businesses along those lines. So still testing the playbook, but so far it's showing some great early signs of traction.
And so, I mean, I guess this would be really helpful for a lot of people out there starting their own companies or in their own companies. What are some of the things that you consistently see brands or companies doing poorly that they could be doing? Or like, yeah, you're saying you're almost getting this cookie cutter approach and applying it to different businesses and going, hey, cool, this is how we can scale you, grow you, learn about your company and analyze it. What are kind of a couple of the biggest mistakes or the biggest shortcomings that you see from these companies?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked, because it's funny. We actually have a book coming out here in about a month called "Shortcut Your Startup," where we basically kind of go over all these things that you're just asking. Either mistakes we've seen made, or things that we think have really evolved or changed in the last five or 10 years. We call them startup switch ups in our book, but it's things that maybe you or I were told about business when we first kind of got interested in it, but have really changed in the new world order 2.0 or things like that. So I'll give you, one example is we have a chapter in Shortcut Your Startup called "Are You a Sailboat or Speedboat?" And speedboat refers to a company like an Uber or Lyft or something like that, or an Airbnb that's like a winner take all market, and you have to try to kind of get to scale or something like that really quickly. And I think we live in this world where everyone reads about those companies and thinks, I want to be the next Facebook, I want to be the next Lyft. And that's just not realistic for 99.9% repeating of people. And so the chapter is called, "Are you a sailboat?" Sailboat versus speedboat. Most brands are much better off trying to be a sailboat, which means you do something, you kind of test it. We call it test, iterate, move. Test, iterate, move. The whole key is testing things. You're a sailboat. You're waiting to kind of catch a gust of that wind, figure out your new course, set it. Sometimes you just got to sit out there when there's no waves and no wind and that sort of thing. And so I think it's a big mistake that, yes, we say this in the book all the time, is time is the new money. You have to run around like your hair's on fire, but you also can't be rash and try to be a speedboat when that opportunity is not there for your brand yet.
And it's the interesting thing when you give that. I mean, I guess with a speedboat, you're constantly piling money in to get the speedboat performing as well, which is like, you see these Ubers and Salesforces and stuff, and you're like, or Snapchats, and it's like, okay, what earnings have you put out? And it's like, oh, nothing. We're just burning through runway because we've got investors at the moment. And
yeah. Continuing with the speedboat analogy, you're right. I mean, it's like speedboat's faster, but it takes a lot more gas. It guzzles that gas, which in the gas is obviously capital or money. But that's the whole point, is once you kind of put down those sails from being a sailboat to a speedboat, there's kind of no going back. So we talk about things like that. We have another chapter I love called "Maintain a Diversified Focus." And it's just that fine line between being focused on what you're doing, but not putting the blinders on to some other thing going on with your business that could be a key insight. I think most of the good brands that come out of that come out these days have some key insight that they found out. It wasn't usually their first insight, but it was the proverbial pivot, and then you go from there, right? Airbnb was called Air Bed and Breakfast. They had no aspirations of doing what they've done, but they found a key insight or two and they locked in on it. And I think there's a messaging app that I think is pretty much all over the world now for your listeners called Slack. Slack started as a gaming platform. They noticed how people were communicating on it. They decided their gaming communication thing wasn't going to work, had enough money in the bank, did the pivot, but it was only through, being in the trenches and investigation and realizing what people were actually using their thing for, that they were able to do that test, iterate, move. And now Slack's a company that, that we've invested in that's worth, I don't know, north of $5 billion. But it's key to kind of have that diversified focus too. And I see a lot of people missing that.
They put the blinders on, and then it's you're just going in one direction. And I guess it's the hard thing that as a startup entrepreneur, you read a couple of books or you talk to some people and they're like, you just got to be laser focused. You got to be doing this and this. Not that I'm saying you don't, but I think it's a really good point in the sense of like, you got to be laser focused, but realize that what you're starting with is probably not going to be what you finish with or what you're going to be doing a year.
Yeah. And that's that's part of why I wrote this book, is I think the world is now so nuanced that it's just really hard to give one size fits all prescriptive advice, right? It's the nuance of those things. Yes, I mean, you have to stay focused, but you can't lose sight of what else is going on around you. And we live in this world where I know we have another example that I like that talks about, I think it's something like a 1% improvement is like 1,000% improvement, because if you run the math on things like, oh, I had a 1% better open rate and a 2% better click-through rate on something I sent out, and then you multiply the sales on it once you actually have, a meaningful amount of sales. I mean, that can lead to like a couple 100% increase in sales by only having seemingly 1 or 2% click-through rate improvements or open rates. And so that is the very fine line game of inches, or in the metric system, centimeters or millimeters that we're playing in right now. And it's so finite and nuanced.
And so with what you're doing at the moment, what's the plan? Is it to continue to scale M13? Are you looking to help businesses in the startup realm, in those initial trenches, or or is this book just out there because you see these mistakes and you want to help?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all those. I think, the book was, we got approached about doing this book because we had a couple successful exits. Great opportunity. I mean, we're being published by Simon & Schuster in the US, who's one of the big publishing houses, Random House in the UK. So couldn't ask for a better team. It was actually co-financed by Derek Jeter, who's a very famous Yankees American baseball player, for people who might not know. And so it was too good to pass up, but we felt like we were right at that time where we're old enough in our late 30s here to kind of have wisdom, and hopefully wisdom through experience, but young enough to kind of still get it, understand how these companies are built, kind of be on that cusp of millennials. I mean, we have 5 or 6 brands that we work with that have gone from 0 to 100 million of sales in 4 or 5 years. And that just wasn't possible 5 or 10 years ago. So we said, gosh, this is that moment where it's really interesting to get that message out there. And we kind of, it used to be, as we like to joke, it used to be, you had this great idea, you keep it secretive, you cradle your precious idea, and you try to launch something. We now live in an open source kind of world. There's very few secrets. There's very few new ideas. So I know that we're the type, we'd rather share what we've learned and hope that leads to something bigger and more collaboration. So part of putting this book out is, just to continue to raise the profile of M13, and hopefully it leads to more partnerships and collaborations. But our plan is to keep, in the short term, looking for great people to partner with to really hopefully super scale their brands and make them successful, and then continue to ideate some of ours as well.
Cool. And what's your role now within the company? Like, what do you do day to day, and what's your biggest strength that I guess are you working to your biggest strength within the company? Yeah,
no, exactly. That's a great question. I mean, I think at some point you kind of learn what your strengths are, what your blind spots are. I have plenty of them, but I think my brother and I are both good at, one phrase we use in the book is do what you do best and outsource the rest. So I've tried to take the things that I think we are best at, do those, kind of be a CEO type whisper to a lot of these companies, not get pulled into the weeds on things I'm either not good at or are very energy draining, and focus on those. The name of our holdco, M13, it stands for Messier 13, which is the brightest cluster of stars in the galaxy, whereby the individual sum of the parts shines greater than the whole. So it's this idea that kind of connecting the dots. And I think we're in a unique position to have been, say, investment bankers, to have been entrepreneurs, to be investors, to be board members, and combining all that experience. I think we're pretty good at putting the pieces together and seeing the bigger vision, or going, hey, if I introduce you to this person and combine it with this and start a JV here and get you into this distribution, that's the formula to get from A to B. And I think most entrepreneurs that I see just haven't experienced that, and we have. And then we're also really lucky to basically live between New York and LA, which really are at the convergence of consumer brands and media and tech, which is where we play. And then, frankly, most entrepreneurs get too busy being pulled into the weeds to really get their head up and try to do some of these big things. So that's where we think we can affect the most change at a systematic level.
Nice, that's awesome. And so, what does your day look like then? Because I mean, I obviously haven't been in the the financial investment world, but you've obviously got different companies that you're looking after or with that are in a lot of different spaces, and I imagine understanding those spaces, the logistics are kind of business, but how do you kind of keep your head in the game for this, this sportswear place versus this, food place versus something else?
Yeah, good question. I think for starters, to do what we're attempting to do, you really have to be someone that likes to juggle a lot of balls and move kind of fluently between projects or calls. And so I think my brother and I are both good at that kind of hustle and transition, and we like that. But to your point, and it's still very much a work in progress, I try to put down a couple of guardrails for my day now, because it's not like when I was at Goldman Sachs where someone else dictates your whole day to you. But when you're partners on other brands, some of your day can be dictated by other people. And so I think you have to leave room for that. So if people find this interesting, I'll just give a couple things. One is I try, and these are kind of what I try to make my rules, but certainly don't always adhere to them. But I try not to do meetings before 9:30 or 10 in the morning. Reason for that is I usually wake up to about 100 emails every day, whether that's global business or even the East Coast, because I'm here in Los Angeles. So just to kind of clear that out and get things moving takes a little while. I try to limit my days to no more than 3 to 4 actual meetings so that you leave time to actually accomplish other work, the stuff, as they say, that's most urgent versus just important. And then to your point, there's always things going on with companies we work with. So you have to leave time to be able to react to things when it's like, hey, we got one day to get samples here. Hey, can you get me in touch with this person? All that takes time. And if you stack your day with 8 meetings, it doesn't work. And the other principle that I'm trying to move more towards that I really like is Paul Graham, who's a great technology kind of mind and puts out a lot of great thought leadership pieces. He has a great article that I always recommend to people called Makers versus Managers Schedule. And it kind of talks about how if you're a manager, you work at a company, people are meeting with you, you're meeting with people, you fill up your day that way. If you're a maker, someone who's trying to be creative, you have to really leave big chunks of time to think deeply, to think high level, to innovate. And even if I have a day where I leave the whole thing open to do some of that, which almost never happens, but I put one meeting in the middle of the day to sit on an amazing podcast like yours, Victor. It's great to do that, but it just the thought of, oh wait, but I have to do this at noon and whatever else, and your wind up, your wind down, that all takes a lot of time. So I try once a week to block like a 4 or 5 hour period where I just don't check email and I leave time for that creativity, which usually kind of happens late afternoon or into the early evening. But I think how we structure our days going forward is one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs and just everyone in society.
Yeah, well, I saw what was it, an interview with God, I can't remember his name. He runs his investment firm.
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett, thank you.
Right.
God, that's horrible. And he was saying when he was getting interviewed, they're saying, so what does your day look like? And he's like, oh, here, I'll grab out my diary, and it had every day blank. And he's like, yeah, if I've got anything more than that, I'm stressed out and I can't handle it, because he literally just sits there and he goes, all right, I've got to think, I've got to read this white paper about this new business or understand this industry and actually have the time to do it. And because all he needs leverage. He just needs one awesome business that they acquire to have $1 billion change if he knows that they can improve it versus, running around spinning plates in the meantime. And I've read that Zuckerberg's doing pretty similar stuff. He spends, half his day kind of reading and doing things just to kind of, get the most out of the day, which isn't obviously applicable to everybody, but it's also a good learning of what are the top people doing to manage their day.
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
Just to wind up with our last couple of questions, outside of your own book, what's the book that's had the biggest influence on you, and what's the best book that you've read or listened to in the last kind of 12 months?
Good question. I don't read as many books as I would like, which is a horrible plug for my own book coming out here, but I read a lot. So I'd say every day I do probably a couple hours of reading, but it's a lot of, short form, medium type things. I love something like Arianna Huffington's Thrive Global. That's the type of content, about how we manage that work-life spectrum that I really like reading, things like that. In terms of actual authors, Tony Robbins is someone I look up to immensely, and have been really lucky to do a little bit of business with him in the past year. He actually gave us a quote for the cover of our book. So I love his books because anytime you read something with him, you're just supercharged. Along that same vein, Tim Ferriss is a guy that I'm sure gets talked about a lot, but he's come out with a couple books lately, and I find that his books are great because we're trying to emulate him a little bit. I call it like a Pixar movie, meaning, you go to a Pixar cartoon movie and you can take a 4-year-old and they laugh and smile. You can take a teenager and they get some more of the jokes, and you take an adult and they get another layer. And I think his books are great because there's layers for everyone, no matter where you are on the food chain. So those are the two people that come to mind.
That's awesome. And final question, 2 years time, what are you doing and where are you doing it?
Oh, the where is a great question. I hope the where is kind of nowhere but everywhere. I really want to be a global citizen of the world and kind of have that experimental lifestyle where, as we are now, we're on different sides of the world, but I feel like I kind of got to know you here, Victor, and just having a good Wi-Fi connection, which might not be that easy, or who knows with the way net neutrality is going here in the U.S., but a computer in our pocket and a good Wi-Fi connection on a computer. So I'd like to be moving around and doing things in different places. I do call LA home, and other than taxes and traffic, which suck everywhere, I love LA and I love its place in the world and think it's having a moment, but that's a conversation for another time. I think in terms of what I'm doing, hopefully it's still M13, but I'm a big believer that if we do it right, I want to be very dispensable, because it means we've built something that other people can build on, that other people are either running the show or empowered to do things, whether that's at a company level, whether that's resources we share. And to me, as you start to think about legacy and things that we're passionate about, wouldn't it be cool to feel like you contribute in some small way to that next group of people doing it?
That's awesome. So I just want to thank you and welcome M13 and yourself to the Youngpreneurs family. If people want to find out more, if they want to check out and grab your book, where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah, sure. Our book, again, is called Shortcut Your Startup. The website is just shortcutyourstartup.com, so it should be easy enough, and it's available right now on Amazon for pre-order.
Cool. Well, we'll link all of that at passiveincomeyoung.com. Again, appreciate your time and the value that you've dropped to our audience a lot, and I look forward to following the journey and again learning in another space that isn't my forte. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for making the time, Victor. Appreciate you getting up early and really enjoyed the chat.
Thanks for listening to the Youngpreneurs podcast. This was proudly brought to you by the Podcast Institute, the #1 training resource to take your business from chasing leads to leads chasing you, and from an absolute amateur to a full-blown authority. If you're looking to take your business to the next level, then a podcast is the obvious answer. You can get national and global exposure in a very fast time, and it's just exactly what I've done with this podcast. So if you want to find out more, get a checklist on how you can get started for under $60, and to find out more through a small training video that I've prepared for you all, then please check out passiveincomeyoung.com/podcast training.